So hey guys, it's Ziont again, and this will be the last Black Ops gameplay for a couple days. I do have some Battlefield that I'm going to post, but I got a few good games last night, and this is some pretty hard objective gameplay on my part, so even though it is Call of Duty, I am playing the objective like crazy. I die a whole bunch in this game, but I also get a lot of kills, and I thought it was good enough to post. But on to the topic, which is something I've mentioned briefly in the past, especially in my gaming history series. And that's what I consider the greatest game I've ever played. Which is not to say that this game is the best game ever made. Because if I look back at it objectively, and really sort of dug into all the nuts and bolts of the game, I'm sure I would find plenty of flaws and plenty of things that I would question, thinking, why did they think this was a good idea? But for a lot of people, the first game that really gets its teeth into them as a kid is the greatest game ever played. And for some people, that's Super Mario 64. For some people, that's Legend of Zelda. For some people, it's something completely different. But for me, it's Final Fantasy VII. And between the two of them, I think Final Fantasy VI has the better storyline, better villain, and better gameplay. But I was, I don't know, 6 years old, 7 years old when I played Final Fantasy VII, and all I had access to was Final Fantasy VII, so I played the game religiously because that's the only choice I had. And I played it to death, and I loved every minute of it, and I can still go back to that game and love every minute of it. But I've never sat down and really thought about why that is. And I thought today I might as well do that, just to sort of get that thinking in my head and to get it off my chest. To begin with, Final Fantasy VII had this quality about it that it didn't look very good. If you spent any amount of time wandering around the world, you would know that the characters were incredibly blocky, and they looked silly. They didn't have mouths, their eyes barely blinked, the hair was anime style on the level we see today. And it all looks very silly. I would almost go to say that it looks cartoonish. But as a 7-year-old, that's exactly what I wanted to see. I wanted to see sort of a cartoony looking game. But what really caught me in that game was how, unlike any other game I'd played, because I played Nintendo primarily before that. I played Zelda, I played Mario. Those games I didn't feel had treated me like an intelligent adult. And while I was intelligent, I was by no means an adult in mind or body. But every kid wants to be known for their maturity, or at least I did. And it was the first game that really made me think. Mario was just sort of this fun time that you could have for a couple hours at a time. Zelda got me thinking about, interpersonal relationships, the role of a hero, what it means to be courageous, what it means to be, just to step up when times are hard. But Final Fantasy VII had this really intellectual quality for me. You have the death of Eris, and that was my first really human confrontation with death. I had lost my first dog not long before I played Final Fantasy VII. But, as much as this sounds cold, losing your pet is not the same as losing someone, a human, who's close to you. And despite all the geekiness of what I'm about to say, Eris was close. It was Eris back in the day. Eris was close to me because she was Cloud's love interest. She was an interesting character, a strong female character, and her death, despite not having a huge emotional impact on me, made me sort of think about what it means to lose someone dear to you. And then there was the sort of schizophrenic nature to Cloud's psyche, that he's being used by Sephiroth, that he's not in complete control of his destiny. And as a child, when you're really not in control of your destiny, you can't really choose which school you go to. You can't choose your parents. You can't choose when to go to the doctor. You can't choose what to eat or when to go to bed. Cloud's situation, while a little confusing for me because I didn't understand that he was having these deep psychological issues, I understood, at least on a surface level, that he wasn't the master of his own destiny, that someone else was making the decisions for him, that he was a child much like I was, at least in mind. And then there's that moment when you go into the live stream, and Cloud's inner self is in fact a child. His most logical thinking portion is him as a boy. And again, while as a little boy I didn't make the connection, now looking back, that was a huge thing for me as a kid. To know that this adult man who is having all these issues is still very much a child inside. That was eye-opening, even if consciously I didn't make the connection. Mechanically as well, Final Fantasy VII gave me something I wasn't getting, even in my core education. Yes, I was doing math and I was doing spelling and all the things 7- and 8-year-olds do in their education, but I wasn't really thinking critically, I wasn't analyzing, I wasn't strategizing. And Final Fantasy VII was my introduction to the turn-based, complicated combat system, with the materia system where you're trying to optimize where you're going with combat, with the limit break system, and all the stats, and all the immunities, and all the resistances and weaknesses that come in with that system. It was working my brain in a way that stimulated me. School at that time wasn't pushing me to think in different ways. I was thinking pretty much like every other kid thinks. Final Fantasy VII allowed me to think very differently. And if I look back as a designer, that is one of the most complicated systems you could ever think of. But as a kid, I knew it was complicated and I knew I was thinking in outside of the box ways. And I loved that. And there's this thought today that games are all about being the hero. But back in Final Fantasy VII's day, while that was important, the hero of Final Fantasy VII, Cloud, was one of the most imperfect characters you could think of. You look at a lot of popular game protagonists today, even Final Fantasy protagonists, they're not really all that flawed. They're strange, or they're annoying to watch or listen to, but there's no depth to them. I mean, even some of the better ones, Call of Duty, Alex Mason is an interesting character, Frank Woods. Commander Shepard, the protagonists and their group in the Knights of the Old Republic games. Those characters have this deep quality to them that you don't see in a lot of games today. And what you also don't see in games today are the third-person, non-player-based protagonist. In a lot of games today, it's very much about making the player character your own, making them unique via skills and all these different things. There are exceptions, of course. The Call of Duty characters are very much defined. They're not going to improve in any particular way beyond the different weapons you might give them. But back in Final Fantasy VII's day, one of the most interesting portions of that game for me was that while these characters weren't really customizable beyond their equipment, you saw them change over the course of the game. In a lot of games today, if the player character isn't a silent protagonist who you build as your own image, they are fairly static when it comes to their personality and their worldview. But in Final Fantasy VII, Cloud has his world turned upside down. In Final Fantasy VIII, Squall finds out that despite all the pain and suffering he's experienced, love is still very much an option. In Final Fantasy IX, Zidane, who is this happy-go-lucky person, when he discovers that he's manufactured, he goes to this horrible time thinking, what's the purpose? And he has to come back around only because his friends told him to. Now in Final Fantasy X, Tidus, for all the annoyingness of that character, when he finds out that Yuna is essentially marching to her doom, all the cheerfulness and all the happy-go-luckiness is just, it just falls away in a manner that you don't see today. I mean, yes, in Black Ops 2, when you find out that Woods shot Mason, spoiler alert, yes, David Mason sort of has this shocked moment, but it doesn't change. He immediately goes back to, oh, it wasn't your fault, Frank, there's nothing you could have done. His worldview doesn't change because he finds out that the man who essentially raised him is responsible for his father's death. Now that I'm out of time, let me simply say that I wish that more video game characters and games would think more about the player and what they might be able to gain from watching the characters develop and the mechanics. Thanks for watching.